World Trade Center 7 collapsed because of fires fueled by office furnishings. It did not collapse from explosives or from fuel oil fires.
A building cannot do free fall with 40,000 tons of structural steel in its structural system without it being blown up.
The only way that a building can accelerate as it collapses is by having pre-engineered, precisely timed, and precisely placed explosives. In other words, controlled demolition.
There was an umbrella of crap 7 feet over my head that I just stared at. Somebody grabbed my shoulder and I started running, and the shit's hitting the ground behind me. And the whole time you hear thum, 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 thum. So, I think I know an explosion when I hear it.
When you have a structural failure, you carefully go through the debris field, looking at each item, photographing every beam as it collapsed and every column where it is in the ground, and you pick them up very carefully and you look at each element. We were unable to do that in the case of Tower 7.
High-rise buildings simply do not collapse due to fire.
In my previous career as a firefighter, normally you'd never be afraid to go into a Type 1 building because they're not combustible, and you would just charge at it and put the fire out. Never in my training were we ever taught that these type of buildings could just collapse in on themselves. There's definitely much more going on than just fire.
Keep your eye on that building, it'll be coming down.
The building is about to blow up. Moving back.
All right, guys. Sorry.
We are looking back. There's a building about to blow up.
I'm a fellow of the American Institute of Architects. For the 40-plus years that I've been practicing architecture, I've designed a variety of buildings from small houses to high-rise office buildings. Some of the high-rises that I've worked on are 1 shell and 2 shell here in Houston. I was project manager for a 22-story office building in Akron, Ohio. Later in the day, when World Trade Center 7 collapsed, they had already showed us pictures of a few fires in that building, and I mean, they weren't even raging. And how could that cause a building to collapse as if it were imploded? Couldn't happen.
If the buildings had come down by fire, we would have seen a more natural progression of collapse.
And clearly a more asymmetrical pattern should have been present.
The symmetry is the smoking gun. It cannot happen that when you have asymmetric damage, you will get a perfectly symmetrical collapse.
The exterior columns on the outside as well as on the inside at the bottom would have to be severed almost at the same time.
At the same time, it should be noted that NIST's report on Building 7 was never published by a peer-reviewed publication. This means their analysis of the collapse cannot be validated from a scientific point of view. Even though this was an unprecedented event in history, we are being asked by NIST to take their word for the soundness of their conclusions.
It's based on sound science, and it is consistent with all the observations we have.
But it has never happened before, right?
But the physics is consistent, it's sound, it's been analyzed, and we have the results. And we are very comfortable with our findings.
They might have been comfortable, but the scientific community of architects and engineers was not.
Science is never secret when it's done right. Science isn't science unless it's published, unless it's openly published and made available for criticism.
Architects and Engineers has asked NIST to at least verify the computer model on which they've based their theory of the collapse. But also in this case, NIST has refused to make their data public.
Structural engineers rail against NIST because they refuse to show the visualization. It's a black box. You cannot download any of this data.
This means that also for the accuracy of their computer model, we have to take NIST's word for it.
Here is our structural model showing the building collapsing, which matches quite well with the video of the event.
This is the video of the event. On the right is one of the two animations released by NIST on the collapse of Building 7.
When you observe the footage of how the building failed, and when you look at the animation of the failure, and compare that to what you actually observe in reality, I think they disprove their own theories. It is impossible for it to fail the way they said.
The second animation released by NIST is even more inconsistent with the real event. While the animation shows a pronounced inward bending of the top of the structure, the video footage shows the entire top section of the building maintaining its shape all the way through the visible part of the collapse. This can be verified by different angles. If this is what NIST calls matching quite well, one can imagine what the reliability of their entire report can be.
I'm Richard Gage. Fires have never before caused the collapse of any skyscraper. And in the case of Building 7, the fire that NIST said started the collapse had actually burned out over an hour before. It could not have caused the collapse, as NIST claims. Yet this 47-story, modern steel-frame skyscraper, which was not hit by an airplane, collapses mostly into its own footprint like a house of cards, as fast as a bowling ball falling off the side of the building, in just under 7 seconds. Listen to the experts.
Building number 7 descended in free fall for the first 100 feet, which means that there was absolutely no resistance to the descent whatsoever.
NIST has admitted it went into free fall for 8 stories. And going from motionless to free fall instantly, that's a bothersome part of the puzzle because NIST never explained it.
We've got a building that came down in its own footprint, so all of the columns really needed to be severed at the same time in order for that structure to fall the way that we saw.
The symmetry is the smoking gun.
The whole building completely comes down in one continuous motion. There couldn't have been any structural resistance.
According to NIST, the failure occurred at column 79 on level 12. They're talking about a single columnar collapse or failure that resulted in a total collapse of the building.
It is possible that you could have a local failure as a result of a connection failing. But the likelihood of that failure dragging the entire building in such a fashion that all the columns would fail at the same time is an impossibility.
What I saw, it was a classic implosion. The center of the core, the penthouse area, starts to move first, and then the building follows along with it.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, you know, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
Explosives are used to demolish buildings like this in just seconds. Okay, so it's a controlled demolition. What's the problem with that? Well, it happened on the afternoon of 9/11 at the World Trade Center. Let's just think about this. Controlled demolitions cannot be engineered and rigged in a day. It takes months. And therefore, this event must have been planned in advance.